Ross Camidge is a medical oncologist practicing and researching lung cancer at the University of Colorado. As you'll notice, he grew up in Great Britain, but has been practicing here for over 20 years. Ross had a couple of minor discomforts that led him to see his doctor. Very quickly, those discomforts led to a diagnosis of lung cancer, the very disease he treats and studies. In September 2025, he told the general public about his diagnosis after treating it for about 2.5 years. That's when I read about Ross in an article on the Colorado Public Radio website. CPR put us in touch, and I met Ross for coffee. I learned that what started as what he assumed to be a pulled muscle and then a slight wheeze in his lung led to one of the most ironic diagnoses I've ever heard. But even through treatment, he continues to practice, treat patients, and speak about his new experience of being a patient with a special perspective. I've enjoyed getting to know Ross and his unique point of view, and I think you will too. This is Dying to Tell You.
Well, it's interesting because you're coming out after you've spent a couple of years getting your own head around it. So it's not quite, I'm dealing with other people's anxiety whilst I'm dealing with my own. So I kind of sorted my own situation. And the other nice thing is I was able to say, ooh, people don't know what to say. Cancer's this big, scary word. But hey, you've actually been interacting with me for the last couple of years. And during that time, you were interacting with a cancer patient. Surprise. Right. And it wasn't terrible. Presumably Our interaction was okay. Mm-hmm. And that, I hope one of the reasons for coming out of the closet is to normalize a terminal diagnosis. That sounds very weird when you say it out loud, but that's one of the things I would hope would come out of this.
Yeah.
My favorite example of the importance of bringing normality into any conversation with someone with a cancer diagnosis is a friend of mine who was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she described how, when she told her friends that they were all kind of like sad-eyed and they didn't know what to say, she said the best friend said, well, not to one-up you, but my commute sucked this morning. And that is how to talk to a cancer patient.
That's good. That's good. Do you hope that people continue to interact with you as they have for the last 2.5 years, not knowing that you have cancer?
I think that's what we would all like. I think all people, whenever an event happens to them, they're still the same person. You lose a leg, you have some health issue. You want people to treat you as the same person because otherwise whatever the unfortunate thing is kind of wins. It sort of dominates. And I don't want to be the lung cancer in the third bed. I'm still the same person I was. I just hope that I can bring a little bit more insight, not just through my words, but through my example.
Yeah. So 2.5, a little bit more than 2.5 years ago, what was happening? What were your symptoms that made you think you should go get checked out by another doctor?
So it was like spring of 2022, the end of May. I started to notice a change in my breathing, and it was a noise. Normally you breathe in and then you breathe out. But when I breathed out, there was a little extra noise at the end. Like there was a little tiny balloon that hadn't quite emptied. And then it was like, oh, it's my turn. And then go, ooh, right at the end. And for me, that sounded like there was a structural thing going on in my lung. I really wanted it to be late onset asthma, but I kind of knew it was something different. So I maybe sat on that for about a week, no more than that. Scheduled to go and see my primary care physician who was away, and I had to see a locum. And I went in there. I talked to my wife that I was a bit worried about what it was, and she was kind of like, it's all going to be fine. But I went to see the locum, and, he was busy writing a prescription for an inhaler. And I said, you do know what I do for a living, because we work in the same building. And he kind of rolled his eyes, and I said, could I have a chest x-ray? And he said, sure. So I left his office, went down in the elevator, went through the x-ray department in the hospital, got my x-ray, then wandered up to my office, and he phoned me and he said, there's something on the x-ray and we need to do a CT scan. And then I pulled up the x-ray in my own office and I went, that's lung cancer. I could tell because that's what I do for a living.
Right.
There was a mass at the top of my right lung. You can see this just on the chest x-ray, which is a fairly blunt instrument. But I could also see what looked like little dots in the other lung. So I already suspected that it had spread to the point where it wasn't curable. I phoned my wife and I said, yeah, I think something's going on. She was up with our two daughters, who at that point in time were about 10 and 12. She was up at Dillon Lake because it was the summer and they were there with some friends. And I said, you don't need to come back. I'm going to get a CT scan. I'll talk to you later. And I went to get the CT scan just of my chest that afternoon. And this time I didn't wait for anyone to call me. I pulled the scans out myself. And I could indeed see the mass at the top of my right lung. I could see there were lymph nodes in the middle of my chest. I could see that there were deposits within both of the lungs. And I could see something eating into the bones, which was probably the cause of that stiff shoulder. And, then I clicked into professional mode.
Yeah, I'm wondering, when you called your wife to tell her, did you tell her, I think I have cancer?
I actually don't remember. I think I had shared with her my fears and concerns, and, that's why I was going to push for a chest x-ray. I think when anyone, it's this sort of there's a shadow on the chest x-ray. I mean, we all know what that means, at least in, movies. So I think she knew. I don't know if I said those words out loud at that point in time.
Yeah. So you switched into professional mode and then what?
So that was a Friday afternoon. On either the Saturday or the Sunday, I came in and I had an MRI scan of my brain. So it's pretty common. About 20% of people with lung cancer will have had it spread to their brain when they're first diagnosed, and I was no different. I pulled the scan up again myself in my office by myself, and there is a 2-centimeter mass in my brainstem, and your brainstem is not that much more than 2 centimeters. So I was kind of looking at it going, that's not compatible with life. That's not a good thing. And
still in professional mode?
Yeah.
You're looking at a patient's.
Yeah. What you do? I mean, that doesn't suddenly disappear.
Sure.
And sure, you go, whatever word you want to say, but it was like, okay, let's get all the bad news on the table. And so I got that. I mean, so I knew absolutely that the cancer had spread. This is not something that surgery was going to treat. This wasn't something that was going to be cured with radiation therapy, that, I was incurable, metastatic, terminal, whatever word you wanted to use, with the disease that I spent 20 odd years looking after.
Yeah. The irony. Do you know any other medical oncologists who specialize in lung cancer that have lung cancer?
No.
I just can't imagine. What are the odds?
I mean, ironically, over the years, I became the go-to person for physicians who got lung cancer around the country. And so they would contact me, and, even some of them were medical oncologists, but they were general medical oncologists. And they would usually do this sort of slightly funny thing where they'd send me an email saying, hey, can I chat to you about a patient? And you go, sure, tell me about them. It's like, no, I want to speak to you on the phone. And you phone them and they go, actually, the patient's me. And so I've been through that before. And so I've had physicians as patients, but I have never had, the irony of somebody who's an expert in that particular disease having that particular disease.
When we were talking before, we were talking about this cerebral, your professional life, and now you're looking at scans of a patient that just happens to be you.
Yeah.
And how, I'm just curious how you go from that cerebral this is not good for this patient to the emotional response of this is not good for me. Or did you? I mean, that could be a very, I would think, effective coping mechanism to go into professional mode and just.
I don't know if you believe me, but it is possible to have two separate things going on in your head at the same time.
Definitely believe that. Yeah.
So the professional me was like, okay, got the scan. Next thing I need the biopsy. The biopsy was scheduled for Monday. Needed the pathologist to do fancy tests on it, which he did on Monday night. Needed to see the results, which I saw on the Tuesday. There was a specific mutation in the cancer that I must have acquired at some point in my life that was driving the cancer. And some of the things that I spent 20 odd years researching and developing is, these specific subtypes of lung cancer that sometimes you can treat just with a pill. And this particular mutation, called an EGFR mutation, for those who really want to nerd out, had a pill. And then this is where the other kind of perfect storm happens. The husband of one of my patients who had passed on literally no more than about 2 weeks beforehand, had handed me back his wife's remaining pills, which happened to be the pills that you use for treating this mutation. And so they were sitting in a cupboard in my office. And so Tuesday evening, when the pathologist says, hey, you've got this mutation, I sent her a picture of the pills, in my hand saying, well, journey started today. Took the pills.
You just
4 days from wheeze to diagnosis and treatment.
Wow. Back to the question.
Yeah. I avoided
the other thing. Yeah.
So I just went into professional mode. So yeah, your question was, when does the emotional thing kick in?
Or what was the emotional thing like?
I remember sitting on the stoop of our house. It was in the summer with my wife, and the kids were in the house, and we didn't tell them what was going on initially. And we were talking through how we were going to tell the kids. And then, I think we both started crying. And I found that, the professional face of me would be good, but there were two things that would punch through that and just get to the emotional heart of me. One of them was any thought about my daughters. And just, because you have your children and you're always thinking about their future and what they're going to turn into. And the sudden realization that I wasn't going to be there for so many things in their future. And I didn't know whether I was going to have, 6 months, a year, several years, whatever. And so that would just make me well up. And then the other thing, which is really interesting in and of itself, was just anyone being nice to me. So I didn't tell that many people, but I told my immediate team, the people who are my work colleagues who, had to be there, who did the biopsies, who did the analyses, they would be very nice. And that would just, I didn't know how to deal with it. And so those things would just punch through whatever the professionalism was, and I would just well up. Mm-hmm. We told the girls by the end of the week.
Yeah.
And my wife had Googled, Google's a wonderful thing, Dr. Google, how do you break bad news to, pre-teenagers? And the answer was you don't present them with a period, you present them with a ... And so we were able to say that Daddy has lung cancer, that it's not curable, he's on treatment already, and you've met some of his patients at functions and things, and they do pretty well, But just to let you know, and we're not asking for anything special from you, maybe an extra hug here or there, but your life, because, you're very self-centered at that age, your life is going to stay the same. These pills, which are great at controlling the cancer, are not a cure.
Right.
At some point, the cancer evolves. If you like the pillars, the environment that you've changed, the cancer goes, ooh, I don't like this environment, kind of shrivels up, but it's still alive and it introduces diversity, additional mutations. And then it's just like trying to figure out the Rubik's Cube that sort of says, okay, now I can grow in this environment. You do everything you can at the beginning to minimize the options of the cancer. So you have to reduce the number of cancer cells to the lowest you can possibly do. And then there's only 3 people doing the Rubik's Cube, not 3 billion trying to figure out the solution.
Yeah.
So towards the end of 2022, while staying on the pill, I had a course of chemotherapy to try and shrink the cancer even further. And then we used radiation, what's called consolidation radiation, to zap pretty much everything that had been on the original scan. And you know that the scan isn't the eye of God. There's going to be other stuff that's microscopic, but you're taking the things that you can see off the table. You're reducing diversity in the cancer and then, just making it harder for that evolution to happen.
Was it surprising, or maybe how was it for you to be receiving all of the treatments that you had prescribed for so many years? Was there a surprise there, or was it harder or easier than you thought?
So 2 things. So I'm still in the cancer closet at this point. My immediate team knew. And so I couldn't go to the chemotherapy infusion center in my own hospital because I'd bump into my own patients.
Sure.
So I went to the one in Cherry Creek, where the only other person I had to tell was the guy who's the doctor there, who was actually one of my first trainees. I think he found it much harder than I did. But, I went there, and I think I had a kind of childlike wonder, of going, wow, this is what it's like.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
Huh.
Or wow, this is what a CT scanner sounds like. Or my goodness, what is, the funny taste in your mouth when they give you chemotherapy? People have talked about it, but I've never experienced it before. So I really enjoyed, in inverted commas, the potential to truly walk in the shoes of my patients.
You really are a researcher, aren't you?
Well, there's that, but it's more than that. I spent 20 years looking after essentially a community, a somewhat marginalized community of people with lung cancer. And I would say within about a week, I had rationalized it that it was a privilege to be able to walk in their shoes.
Would you say more about that?
I mean, you've been a chaplain, you have, in old-fashioned terms, a sort of flock of people that, you look after as the shepherd. Mm-hmm. And, I've championed that for lung cancer for 2 decades. And I couldn't think of anything more fitting than to really understand them at that most personal level by literally walking in their shoes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then if I share with you what, some of the people who later found out would say, and they go, apart from the ironic, is they go, if anyone should get lung cancer, it shouldn't be you. And I would correct them. I would go, no, I am no less deserving of this diagnosis than anyone else. And if anything, I can deal with it better.
Yeah.
Because I understand it. And so I think that's the privilege, that I get to take one diagnosis for the team.
Yeah. Huh. I often wonder, I've had the privilege of meeting several physicians who have some sort of terminal diagnosis, and nurses as well. And I have a close friend who's a social worker who's dealing with cancer right now. And I often wonder if that expertise better prepares someone, or if it gives somebody a little too much insight into the reality of the situation. What do you think?
I've seen it both ways. So I've looked after doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals, with a diagnosis of cancer. And yes, some of them definitely are like, okay, I get it. I understand what's coming and I'm okay with it. I've had some who used medical aid in dying because they wanted to avoid what they thought was the inevitable end. I've had others say, it depends on their age and what's going on in their life, that, they didn't want to treat it. And I've had others who, are trying to be the best patient they can because they've seen both good and bad patients in the past. And the stereotype of the physician as a total pain in the butt is as a patient hasn't really manifested. The only thing I've seen is occasionally physicians self-diagnosing and self-prescribing for some of their symptoms and maybe getting into a little bit of a mess with that.
Yeah. Well, let's get back to the professional side now, or the treatment, I guess. You went through the chemotherapy and the radiation, your fascination with that, and all the eye-opening experiences of that. And how did that go? I assume it went fairly well.
It went pretty well. I didn't miss a day of work. I still kept my clinic. I decided not to take on any new patients, but I could hide that under the story of, we had new faculty who'd come on. They needed to build their clinic. Everybody wants to see me because I'm the big name. And so if I close my clinic, it's the decent thing to do and they can build up their clinics. The real reason was I didn't know how long I had. I didn't want to commit to a relationship with the patient that I might end up backing out of, for want of a better euphemism.
Yeah.
I'd go a little crazy, for want of a better word, just before my scans, and I would have scans every 90 days, brain scans, body scans, just to sort of see how things were under control. And, this is where the emotional brain sort of takes over. You start to go, like, on this day at this time, when I get the results of my scans, my fate will be decided, which is somewhat silly, because in your head, it's kind of like they're going to open this envelope and it's like, you're alive or you're dead. And you go, you're obviously not dead.
Right.
You went into the scanner alive and you came out of the scanner alive, but your head doesn't let you imagine the future until you have that result. And so for about a week beforehand, I literally cannot plan anything for even the week afterwards. And you get grumpy when people are sort of going, well, can you do this? Can you go out to dinner then? And it's kind of like, no, you can.
Yeah. And you can't tell them why even.
Well, the people who knew, but, and usually it's people who you tend to get grumpy with those you love the most.
Yeah.
And so they already knew. But yeah, it was definitely a weird kind of brain spinning time. And they call it scanxiety, and it's real.
Yeah.
And I think going through it myself gave me some insights in terms of helping my own patients deal with it, just by calling out the elephant in the room, the difficulty of seeing the future, and their sort of eyes would light up and they go, yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Were there any other things that you noticed that changed in the way you practiced?
Well, I joked with you the other day that, when people ask me that question, the implication is that I was some terrible doctor.
You were bad before, but now.
I was awful, but now I get it.
Now you're compassionate.
Yeah. So there was a movie called The Doctor, which had John Hurt in it, I think, and he was like this complete stinker of a surgeon. And then he gets some kind of lame cancer that they can cure, but he becomes a nice guy. But no, I think I developed more insights into the practicalities, what the scans were like, the anxiety around them. I'd like to think that I was an okay doctor at listening and connecting with people. And so if there was a change, I hope it wasn't a huge change.
Sure.
But I'm sure it made me somewhat better too.
Yeah. I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that you were bad before. I wondered if it gave you more insight into the experience of your patients, and if that made you change anything that you did. But
I think I had more insights into side effects and what they were really like. And that I'd been working on something from a research perspective in terms of how we describe side effects for particularly new treatments for cancer. And they come from an age of chemotherapy where we describe the peak toxicity, so at its worst, you're going to be throwing up 4 times a day, not 3 times, not 6 times, but 4 times a day. And you go, great, what day will it happen on? And you go, I can't tell you that. How long will it last for? I can't tell you that. And so the way we describe it is not user-friendly. Whereas I think having gone through it myself, I could actually say, yeah, you're going to be non-functional for this many days, and then you're going to be good, and you can go back to work. So the average time the pill controls the cancer is about 18 months. And, mine was controlled, for 24, 25 months before something started to show up.
And then a progression of your disease happened.
Yeah, so again, one of the other things that we've championed, so it's kind of like, thank you, Dr. Camidge, for helping, develop these things. Cheers, mate.
Good job.
We don't just rely on the CT scans. We also do some blood-based markers. And if they start to go up and the CT is normal, we say the CT is missing something, and we do a different kind of scan, something called a PET scan. And that's exactly what happened to me. CT scans all look great. One of these blood markers started to go up, and we did a PET scan, and there was a little patch at the back of my right chest wall, so a few inches below my shoulder blade on the right. And I had a little tightness there too. And, that was the first weed in the garden growing in the presence of the weed killer. That was the first evolution of the cancer. It's not game over. It's not like everything's, evolved. If you can catch it early, you can spot that, what's literally a clone of the cancer growing up before it spread. So that was at the beginning of this year. So we jumped in with more radiation to that area. And then I thought, it's probably not the only weed. It may be the only one I can see. I'll go back on chemotherapy. And there had been a development. If you wait long enough, research moves around you and you can benefit from it. And so there'd been a development with a drug being licensed that was called amivantamab. And yes, all cancer drugs have terrible names. And it was supposed to, make the chemotherapy more effective. It was supposed to make people live longer. And, I discussed it with my oncologist, and we said, okay, let's just add that in. And I had terrible side effects from that. It sort of exaggerated all of the side effects of the chemotherapy. So I was very nauseated. I was very constipated. I hope whoever's listening is, prepared for these kind of discussions.
I think so.
And, the idea that I couldn't actually get food in at the top and I couldn't get whatever out at the bottom was just incapacitating. I lost 10, 15% of my body weight. It gave me a rash, which has now sort of turned into freckles. But at the time, it was kind of like just, inflamed skin, and particularly in my scalp. I actually got sores in my scalp, which were huge. I mean, they were, the size of your palm, and they were sort of taking up much of my hair. I kind of buzz cut my hair to make it easy, but it still happened. And I went from being somebody with cancer who nobody knew to somebody who looked like they had cancer. And I remember looking at my skinny arms and skinny legs and saying, I don't know whose body this is.
Yeah. Weird sensation. How did you manage to stay hidden in that time?
Yeah, I'm still doing clinics. I started to wear like theater caps, those things that surgeons wear. I started to wear a face mask, so they couldn't see the rash. And, I tell people I had a cold and I'd sort of wave at them. And, but, maybe they suspected something was going on, but we still managed to keep the secret. And then for teleconferences and, all the national and international stuff I do from my office through Zoom. Miraculously, my Zoom camera was not working for a few months. But, it got to the point, a combination of, I started to feel like I was going from just not telling the whole truth to actually misleading people. And I mean, I described to someone that at its worst, it was like death with vomiting and constipation. And it was pretty bad. And I thought, if I'm going to end my life, the idea that I might be able to do some good because of my platform and coming out with this diagnosis, this was the time.
It seems like kind of all the side effects from the horrible chemotherapy regimen kind of was I don't know, not the impetus, but the catalyst anyway.
Well, that plus because the first progression event had occurred, I know that, life expectancy shrinks when that occurs.
Yeah.
And so you go from this theoretical, maybe I'm going to be the one. Maybe I'm going to be the one who is like at the tail end of the curve who doesn't progress. And it was like, nope, you're going to be just like everyone else.
Was that disappointing?
No, I'm a fatalist at heart.
And how the years alight themselves and blend into a single flame. I don't think there's a good way out, but I don't know how I can stay.
What would you tell your prognosis is?
Now?
Yeah.
Somewhere between 6 months and 2 years, with lots of unknowns. It depends on when the next progression occurs. Is it isolated being treated with radiotherapy? Am I back onto some kind of chemotherapy? Will it respond to the chemotherapy? The specific mechanism resistance it will manifest and whether that's treatable or not. So, yeah. And I think another progression event is probably occurring. I can feel it. And I have scans in 2 days' time.
Okay. Thank you for saying that. And I think that sometimes oncologists are reticent to say a prognosis. And I think it's also really instructive that you, as the expert on your own cancer, can only give a very broad range of length of life. It's eye-opening to hear that.
Yeah, when people ask me how long have I got, doc question, which comes up fairly frequently, the answer, for anyone who'd like to go into oncology is never 6 months. Because if you say that, people fixate on that number and they draw a ring on the calendar and they go, that's it. What you do, I think, more appropriately, both in terms of communication and in terms of scientific accuracy, is you describe the units it's going to be measured in. Days, weeks, months, years. And you also, so if you like, you're presenting the average, but you also present the range. So I give you a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. So best case scenario, these things just come up as little weeds. You would control it. And we're talking a number of years, less than a decade, but a number of years. Worst case scenario, the thing just, finds the magic formula to grow and just takes off. And, you really can have something measured in months at that point.
Up to this point, I haven't heard you say anything about whether or not to treat. It's been assumed that you would do the treatments that are coming. And after we talked last night and you talked about your most recent chemotherapy and how bad that was. I don't want to say bad, how difficult that was for you. I'm wondering if you can imagine a time when you would say there's more treatments that might be effective, but they're not for me.
Well, no, I've already been there. So I was supposed to have 4 doses of this new drug, and I got to 3, and I said, I'm crying uncle, I can't do this.
Yeah.
Because literally the treatment was worse than the disease.
Yeah. If you're having your next progression, and do you know what the next treatment options would be? I mean, if anybody would, it would be you, I would suppose.
Well, no, but you ask, it's funny because that in my mind was a bit of a mental no-go area for a while. And then just in the last week, I was like, put your big boy pants on and, think it through. If this, then this, if this, then this. So I think, again, if the progression is localized, it'll be local radiation treatment. If it's more widespread, probably a biopsy to see if we can figure out what's going on, see if we can tweak the pills. If it's none of that, then it starts to get a little darker, different types of chemotherapy without that other drug added in. And yeah, you start to see sort of, death as this theoretical possibility in the distance. And sure, you could have, with a diagnosis of cancer, you get to sort of, wave at it and it's actually there, but then it comes, poof, it's right under your nose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Last night you described, we're all driving down the road, headed toward a bridge that's out.
Yeah.
An exit. And that you have your headlights on. Everybody else is kind of driving in the dark.
Yeah, they know it's going to happen at some point. I mean, they don't know when.
Yeah.
But I can see it, and as I get closer, it'll be clear as to how long it's going to take me to get there.
Yeah. As you get closer, what has become more important to you, or most important, I should say?
Well, one of the things is it's the people that you touch. And obviously my daughters are at the top of that list. And, what I can do now, what I can do to prepare them, emotionally, financially, all of that stuff. And then there's a kind of realm around that, which is kind of close family. And then around that is the sort of professional people that I've sort of mentored that, I've been a kind of second father figure to for some of them, and make sure that they're okay. The career itself doesn't really matter to me, but it hasn't mattered for a few years anyway. I don't care about another prize or another, lecture or another publication. Seeing other people's success that I've helped along the way, I think is much more valuable to me. And I think I shared with you last night that my medical school has just had their 30-year reunion. And it's really funny because there's this group of people I knew who were kind of medical students, and like most medical students were kind of like goofing off and doing all the other stuff. And then you meet them now, and they're, either have retired or are contemplating retirement. And it was like, so what did you do in the intervening 30 years? That was when you worked.
Right.
That was your career. Right. It's like, so how'd that go then? And it's just a page in a book.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard not to see your life as you are in that working space is all of it.
Yeah. Who you are is your job. And yet when you get past it, it's just a chapter in a book.
Yeah. So apart from your job, who are you?
Well, I think one of the things, and I want to thank you for calling me by my first name and not calling me Dr. So-and-so, because I think I said to you last night, I wasn't born a doctor, and I'm not going to die a doctor.
That's right. Yeah.
I'm not going to die with my stethoscope on. And, that was a period of time. And I get some enjoyment in thinking that I made the world a somewhat better place, either just for my patients or for a bigger community through, some of the research. But, at the end of the day, the people you really matter to are the people you've sort of touched in sort of loving relationships. I think not professional relationships. And, those are the ones you treasure and you hope And you hope you didn't screw it up too much.
Indeed. Yeah. The themes that I hear from people are just that. That, the things, the house, even the experiences pale in comparison to the relationships. And it's common. It's a common theme, I should say.
I like the story you told me that, people don't have the bucket list of, the grand trips. It's they just want to sit there and cook dinner with their family.
Yeah. That's what I want to do. And that's what I want to do now, but that's also what I want to do when it's my turn, when it's my turn to come to the end. I was on another podcast and they asked, what do you want at the end of your life? I was like, I just want to, lay on my couch and listen to people cook in my kitchen. And that's all I want. That's all I want to do.
One of the patients I looked after very early on, we'd had the conversation about, at that point in time, there was nothing more we could do. And her husband wrote to me after she passed on. And he said, I think they had a few months in hospice. And they said she worked through her favorite recipe book and cooked every recipe in it. And he said they were the most valuable 2 months of their entire relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And as far as, monetarily or, big events, unremarkable, right? It just completely ordinary being at home cooking with each other. That's beautiful.
So my favorite example is my wife for a period of time was binge watching The Bachelor and The Bachelorette. And, the reality is, you don't build a relationship by sitting on the deck of an ocean liner with an orchestra playing to you whilst you have dinner and there's a choir of otters singing in the background. The reality is it's like going to Super Target and walking down the aisle.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. What are things, are there any things that you want to make sure you do before you die?
Well, we're always going to leave things unfinished. Yeah. Always. That email inbox is never going to be empty. It never is now. So it's certainly not going to be. Right. I don't have to be buried. I'll just lie there or get covered in emails. If I could, I've written 2 books, both of which I started actually before my diagnosis, and I'd love to find an agent to see if I can get them published. The people who've read them seem to like them. I want to make sure my youngest daughter, who's applying to high school, gets into a good school, and whatever I can do to help that. My oldest daughter, I want to do what I can to help prepare her for the real world. Financially, we're okay, which is a blessing. But yeah, not a whole bunch of things. I try and get some new experiences during this time to kind of keep me fresh. I mean, the last thing you want to do is just sit there and, give up. And I enjoy that. And so I created something called the 90-day challenge, which I shared with my patients, which is like, okay, you got 90 days between the scan. Don't just sit there and wait for bad news. Come back and tell me, almost like a prescription, what you did in that 90 days. Mm-hmm. And, you don't have to climb Mount Everest. You don't have to become an expert, violin virtuoso. But if you want to take one violin lesson, that's fine. If you want to go to a restaurant you've always wanted to do, if you wanted to call someone you haven't called for years, just whatever. Just so you can say, in those 90 days, I did X. And maybe it was just all in one afternoon, but you did something. Mm-hmm. And so I've tried to live that message myself. And that's been kind of fun. People have helped me in that. So like I did my first knitting class a couple of weeks ago.
Very nice.
It's strangely therapeutic. And once you come out of that closet and say, I'm a man and I've knitted. There is this support community that you have never imagined.
Ah, okay. Maybe I'll take up knitting. Yeah. Okay.
I'm a fan.
Yeah. Chris says, "Oh, you want to?"
Yeah, you see, that's it. Then people start giving you like orders, like, "I'll have a scarf, please." It's like, I'm just learning the basics.
Right.
Maybe a kind of washcloth. That's about as far as you're going to get.
Yeah, like a trivet or something.
Yeah.
These days are running slow. Sunsets and shores far from home. Headlights are shining on the sea. No place on earth I'd rather be. And I could try to just follow the swell, but I'll never find this anywhere else.
How do you feel?
Like physically?
No, whatever you want to answer.
Well, physically, I'm slightly stiff in the right posterior, the back part of my rib cage, because I think that's where something's going on. Otherwise, physically, I'm not too bad. I still make a funny wheezing noise, at night, but that's not a deal breaker. Mentally, I think I'm okay. I think I've got my head around it. I think being given the opportunity to do some good in a different way by speaking publicly about that is a gift to me. And emotionally, I think most of the time I'm okay. I just went on vacation just with my two daughters alone to visit my brother in Germany. And, I joked with my wife afterwards that I had increased respect for her of like how she looks after the kids full time. And I was like, yeah, gosh, how do you even think about anything else?
Yeah.
Because I was, the be all and the end all, and, I had to get him up in the morning and breakfasted and all the other things that teenagers don't want to do. And that was good. That was precious for me.
Mm-hmm. As you think about, in the next 6 months to a year or two, when you are going to come to the end of your life, how do you want it to be? Do you have any thoughts about that?
So one thing as a small aside is I often explain to physicians in training or other healthcare professions, and sometimes even to patients, that death isn't a failure, because otherwise everyone's life is a failure.
That's right.
But that said, there are good and bad deaths. And mostly that relates to how long the period of disability is and whether you have your mental faculties during that period of time. So in an ideal world, my brain is still functioning and, the life support system, the body just is failing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. Somebody asked me this the other day as to whether I would ever do medical aid in dying, which is a whole nother discussion, but I have prescribed medical aid in dying several times. I can see it. When I was in, the basement with, death with vomiting and constipation, I had zero quality of life. And I could see that might be the last act of self-control. But in the same way that, with patients I've had who I've done medical aid in dying, sometimes the disease doesn't care what your plans are. It just does something, or something sudden happens. Mm-hmm. So yes, in an ideal world, not that anyone's listening, but in an ideal world, it would be maintaining my faculties with minimal amount of loss of function and independence, and a fairly swift end, but not like I go out and I don't come back, but a swift end over a relatively short number of days.
Yeah. You said not that anybody's listening. Religious person? No.
Well, chaplain. No. I mean, I grew up with assemblies in school, with church messages. But I think I have some spirituality. I think, I have discussions with somebody, but I don't really buy into the organized religion. It just doesn't work for me. I respect it in other people.
Sure.
I wish I did have that. I mean, I think it would be a great comfort. But no, I suspect when you're gone, you're gone.
Is that, I don't know, is that distressing? Is that comforting? Either one?
That's like saying, is gravity distressing or comforting? It just is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know. Sometimes I wish I could fly, but yeah.
Wish you didn't drop things on your foot. Or
yeah, right. So sometimes it is distressing, but yeah, I mean, people ask me sometimes, fairly rarely actually, surprisingly, what I think happens at the end, and it just kind of depends on the day.
Well, what do you think happens?
I don't know, and that is the only real answer, as far as I'm concerned. I think, well, today, sitting here with you, I think probably you're right. I think probably over and out. We got this electrical firing in our brain, and it stops, and then not much happens. There is an energy in us, and it doesn't go anywhere. It kind of dissipates and all kind of goes back. But I don't think that I'm gonna wake up on the other side and have my self.
I don't think. I mean, you wouldn't wake up with your memories intact and be you.
Right. On the other hand, I have some hope that I get to do this again. It's been so much fun. I would love to think that there's, this infinite wheel of life that I could come back and experience this again. But, the likelihood that I would have the wherewithal to recognize that, I don't know. But yeah, so, I have those hopes, but yeah, probably over and out. And to me, that is, at least right now, not distressing or comforting, but it is an invitation to put as much as I possibly can into what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
So yeah,
there is something you can do with your body afterwards that I'm intrigued by that helps facilitate that. So I have a garden, and I really like my garden. If you get cremated, it's horribly alkali, all your, and so it's essentially like poison to your garden.
Sure.
So, scattering your acid, but there is this thing called body composting, and it's not legal in Colorado yet, but it's legal in several states. And essentially they put you in an incubator with some enzymes and some straw, and they turn you into about a cubic yard of soil.
Yeah.
And most of it they donate to national parks, but that you can get some containers of the soil. And I love the idea of, my kids throwing it in the garden and growing some plants and, pointing to the sunflower and going, yeah, it was a bit of dad in there.
Dad.
Yeah. The company is called Earth, and you can Google Earth Burial, and it's legal. It's just been made legal in Virginia, where a friend of mine is. And, we decided we were going to be death buddies, so we signed up as founder members.
Okay.
So if it comes, legal in Colorado, I get a discount.
Well, could you be transported to?
Yeah, apparently you can.
You could just get yourself there.
Yeah, you got to make sure whoever's in charge of your body
is on board
with that.
Sure.
But there's a whole element of like, yeah, it'd be nice to do this, but I'm not going to care.
That's true. That's true. But it might, especially to your daughters, it might be meaningful or
yeah. I mean, if it was, this is what I said to my friend who I'm death buddy with, as it'd be really cool if this really took off. And then when you went to the flower shop and you bought some flowers, it said, instead of it saying chrysanthemum, it said, Joe Schmo, died in this whatever, and you go,
Yeah.
those flowers have a story.
These are Ross.
Yeah, exactly. I'll have a bunch of Ross, please.
All right. Well, the last question we ask everybody is, how do you want to be remembered?
I would like to be remembered as the best guest you ever had on this podcast.
Well, yeah, I think you're doing pretty well.
No, but seriously, when you told me you were going to ask me that question, the answer is actually another question, which is that it depends on who you're talking about. Because obviously, how my kids might remember me could and should be very different from how a casual acquaintance might remember me, or somebody who just knows me by reputation, or my family. And so you get into these kind of, nested circles. And, the center of that, are my two daughters. And I think it's hard because I know I'm going to leave them when they're not yet fully independent. And they may well feel that I've abandoned them. And I hope at some point they realize that that's not by choice. And that given the constraints of the time I have and the budget for mental, emotional energy, that we just try and do the best we can. And I hope I've tried to do the best I can for them, and that they remember the good times, the times we laughed, the times we cried, but we were together as a unit. And then as you sort of expand out and you get to people who maybe you've touched their lives in some way or another, but not quite as intimately, you want to think that you impacted people positively, that you presented a role model, or perhaps even an example of things not to do, but that you made them feel seen and valued, and that they get to continue, the great experiment of life, and, hopefully they do bigger and better things. And then for the people who don't really know me, but just sort of see me as a leader in some field, they can decide whatever the hell they like.
Good. I think you're the first person really to parse out the concentric circles of influence, and I really appreciate that. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming here, and thank you for being so generous with your thoughts and your experience. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. Thank you, Ross, for sharing your story and offering your perspective as a physician and a patient. I hope to follow up with him in the coming months for a callback episode. When we do, you'll be able to find that episode at patreon.com/dyingtotellyu, where you can subscribe for free to get access to videos from our interviews and other content not found anywhere else. Thank you for listening. This is Dying to Tell You.